Hello everybody, and how are you? I'm glad to have you here, and it's good to be here. I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand. I'm just going to turn off my headphones because they're sitting next to me and talking to my microphone, which is going to cause problems for everybody. So here we go. I'm Jev. I live in New Zealand and I read old-fashioned children's stories, and I'm reading them for you. I've been doing this since the start of lockdown here in New Zealand last year. And I started with some very, very simple old-fashioned children's stories that have been around for a long time. G'day, roosters. Good to have you here. They've been around a very long time, and when I finished all the books that those were in, I left it for a while, and I was wanting to do some more reading, and I couldn't find anything else that was that sort of standard of writing for little children. And then I remembered all the other ones that I grew up with, and I thought, yeah, let's read some of those. So I am back reading again, and I've been doing it for a while. I save the recordings from here and post them over on YouTube, unless you're actually watching this over on YouTube, in which case, welcome, you're already seeing it. And yeah, so it's lots of fun. I do it 3 days a week. It's good. It's sharing stuff that's the sort of thing that I grew up with that a lot of people don't get anymore these days. And if you're listening over on YouTube, I will be talking to the people in my chat here on Twitch, but you can't see that because I've edited that out. But I will try and read out loud what they say if I'm going to answer them. So, hi roosters, thank you for having you here. Thank you for being here. Good to see you again. And I'm sorry, I missed your stream the other day. This morning, yesterday, I can't remember. I remember you saying you were going to be streaming. And I'm doing well. A little bit too busy. I've just been doing some sewing for Son of Jev, which you can ask him all about. He's probably posted photos somewhere that you can see. So I'm going to not talk anymore, but read. And the rider with me reading is, I need to tell you, have a drink of water with you handy, and possibly something to snack on if you are a snacking sort of person. And somewhere comfortable to sit, because it's much better when you're listening to a story to have somewhere comfortable to sit. And we shall start reading. I'm just looking across at my other monitor, please excuse me a minute, and seeing how my computer is going. My poor little computer, its brain is full and it's thinking really, 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 really hard trying to catch up with what I'm doing. It's one of those things. Not a lot I can do about it. Not at this stage. Anyway, so I'll ignore it. It will get itself sorted out, and I shall read. So here we go. I am reading The Wouldbegoods by a lady called Edith Nesbit, and it is the second book in a series about the children who are the Bastable children. The first book is The Story of the Treasure Seekers. The second book is The Wouldbegoods, being the further adventures of the treasure seekers. And then there's actually a third book, which is, I think, probably something like More Adventures of, or Further Adventures of the Treasure Seekers, or something like that, which I haven't read yet, obviously, because it's a sequel. And I'm reading chapter 11, The Benevolent Bar. That sounds a bit odd. We'll see how it goes. And I'm sure they're going to get in trouble. They get in trouble every single chapter. Sometimes it's things where they really should have thought better. Other times it's because they're trying to be helpful and they just didn't realise that there were some things that could happen as a ramification or a result of the choices they had made. But we'll see. Let's see what trouble they get into today. Chapter 11, The Benevolent Bar. The tramp was very dusty about the feet and legs, and his clothes were very ragged and dirty, but he had cheerful, twinkly grey eyes, and he touched his cap to the girls when he spoke to us, though a little as though he would rather not. It used to be a sign of respect to tug at your cap or to tap your cap. Sorry, my fingers, yeah, I cut my finger when I was chopping cabbage for coleslaw last night. I'll carry on. We were on top of the big wall of the Roman ruin in the three-tree pasture. We had just concluded a severe siege with bows and arrows, the ones that were given to us to make up for the pistol that was confiscated after the sad but not sinful occasion when it shot a fox. One of the previous chapters. See the recordings. To avoid accidents that you would be sorry for afterwards, Oswald, in his thoughtfulness, had decreed that everyone was to wear wire masks, like for fencing. Fencing, not building a fence in a paddock, but we use a fencing foil, an épée, E-P-E-E, that sort of like on-guard sword fighting thing. Anyway, probably, I'm guessing, wire masks. Luckily, there were plenty of these because a man who lived in the moat house once went to Rome, where they throw hundreds and thousands at each other in play and call it a comfort battle or battaglia di confetti. That's real Italian. And he wanted to get up that sort of thing among the village people, but they were too beastly slack, so he chucked it. And in the attic were the wire masks he brought home with him from Rome, which people wear to prevent the nasty comforts getting in their mouths and eyes, probably mainly their eyes. So we were all armed to the teeth with masks and arrows, but in attacking or defending a fort, your real strength is not in your equipment, but in your power of shove. Oswald, Alice, Noel and Denny defended the fort. We were much the strongest side, but that was how Dickie and Oswald picked it. The others got in, it is true, but that was only because an arrow hit Dickie on the nose and it bled quarts, as usual, quarts like litres, gallons, lots. His nose bled. Yeah, you got that idea now. Sorry, I've just got something going on my phone now, which is not what I need. I'll carry on. Find out where I was. Sorry, I have ADHD, so it's really, really sometimes hard to keep track of where I'm up to. So an arrow hit Dickie on the nose, and it bled quarts as usual, though hit only through the wire mask. So it was just lightly tapped, but he's got a sensitive nose. Then he put into dock for repairs, and while the defending party weren't looking, he sneaked up the wall at the back and shoved Oswald off and fell on top of him, so that the fort, now that it had lost its gallant young leader, the life and soul of the besieged party, was of course soon overpowered and had to surrender. Then we sat on the top and ate some peppermints Albert's uncle brought us a bag of from Maidstone when he went to fetch away the Roman pottery we tried to sell the antiquities with. That's another story again. The battle was over and peace raged among us as we sat in the sun on the big wall and looked at the fields, all blue and swimming in the heat. We saw the tramp coming through the beet field, a field that grows beets, obviously. Through the beet field. Where is it? It's near the bottom of the page. We saw the tramp coming through the beet field. He made a dusty blot on the fair scene. When he saw us, he came close to the wall and touched his cap, as I have said, and remarked, "Excuse me interrupting of your sports, young gentlemen and ladies, but if you could so far oblige as to tell a labouring man the way to the nearest pub, it's a dry day and no error." "The Rose and Crown is the best pub," said Dickie, "and the landlady is a friend of ours. It's about a mile if you go by the field path." "Lor, love a duck," said the tramp, "a mile's a long way, and walking's a dry job with this here weather," and we agreed with him. "'Pon my sacred," said the tramp, "if there was a pump handy, I believe I'd take a turn at it. I would indeed, so help me if I wouldn't, though water always upsets me and makes me hand shaky," probably because he would rather have something stronger to drink. We had not cared much about tramps since the adventure of the villainous sailor man and the Tower of Mystery, but we had the dogs on the wall with us. Lady was awfully difficult to get up on account of her long deerhound legs, and the position was a strong one and easy to defend. Besides, the tramp did not look like that bad sailor, nor talk like it, and we considerably outnumbered the tramp anyway. Alice nudged Oswald and said something about Sir Philip Sidney and the tramp's need being greater than his, so Oswald was obliged to go to the hole in the top of the wall where we store provisions during sieges, and get out the bottle of ginger beer which he had gone without when the others had theirs, so as to drink it when he got really thirsty. Meanwhile, Alice said, "We've got some ginger beer. My brother's getting it. I hope you won't mind drinking out of our glass. We can't wash it, you know, unless we rinse it out with a little ginger beer." "Don't ye do it, miss," he said eagerly. "Never waste good liquor on washing." The glass was beside us on the wall. Oswald filled it with ginger beer and handed down the foaming tankard to the tramp. He had to lie on his young stomach to do this. The tramp was really quite polite, one of nature's gentlemen, and a man as well. And we found out afterwards. He said, "Here's to you," before he drank. Then he drained the glass till the rim rested on his nose. "Swelp me, but I was dry," he said. "Don't seem to matter much what it is this weather, do it? So long as something's wet. Well, here's thanking you." "You're very welcome," said Dora. "I'm glad you liked it." "Like it," said he. "I don't suppose you know what it's like to have a thirst on you. Talk of free schools and free libraries and free baths and washhouses and such. Why don't someone start free drinks? He'd be a hero, he would. I'd vote for him any day of the week and one over. If you don't object, I'll sit down a bit and put on a pipe." He sat down on the grass and began to smoke. We asked him questions about himself, and he told us many of his secret sorrows, especially about there being no work nowadays for an honest man. At last he dropped asleep in the middle of a story about a vestry he worked for that hadn't acted fair and square by him like he had by them, or it, I don't know if vestry is singular or plural, hadn't acted fair and square like he had by them or it, and we went home. But before we went, we held a hurried council and collected what money we could from the little we had with us. It was 9pence halfpenny. And wrapped it in an old envelope Dickie had in his pocket and put it gently on the billowing middle of the poor tramp's sleeping waistcoat, so that he would find it when he woke. None of the dogs said a single syllable while we were doing this, so we knew they believed him to be poor but honest, and we always find it safe to take their word for things like that. That's trusting the dog's instincts. It's still like that. As we went home, a brooding silence fell upon us. We found out afterwards that those words of the poor tramp's about free drinks had sunk deep in all our hearts and rankled there. After dinner we went out and sat with our feet in the stream. People tell you it makes your grub disagree with you if you do this just after meals. Old wives' tales about having any part of you in the water after you've eaten. That's what that one is. Yes. Anyway. People tell you it makes your grub disagree with you if you do this after meals, but it never hurts us. There is a fallen willow across the stream that just seats the 8 of us, only the ones at the end can't get their feet into the water properly because of the bushes, so we keep changing places. We had got some licorice root to chew. This helps thought. Dora broke a peaceful silence with this speech. "Free drinks." The words awoke a response in every breast. "I wonder someone doesn't," H.O. said, leaning back till he nearly toppled in, and was only saved by Oswald and Alice at their own deadly peril. "Do, for goodness sake, sit still, H.O., observed Alice. "It would be a glorious act. I wish we could." And that's continuing with the free drinks idea. "What, sit still?" asked H.O. "No, my child," replied Oswald. "Most of us can do that when we try. Your angel sister was only wishing to set up free drinks for the poor and thirsty." "Not for all of them," Alice said, "just a few. Change places now, Dickie. My feet aren't properly wet at all." It is very difficult to change places safely on the willow. The changers have to crawl over the laps of the others while the rest sit tight and hold on for all they're worth. But the hard task was accomplished, and then Alice went on. "And we couldn't do it for always, only a day or two, just while our money held out. Eiffel Tower lemonade's the best, and you get a jolly lot of it for your money too. There must be a great many sincerely thirsty persons go along the Dover Road every day." "It wouldn't be bad. We've got a little chink between us," said Oswald. "And then think how the poor grateful creatures would linger and tell us about their inmost sorrows. It would be most frightfully interesting. We could write all their agonied life histories down afterwards, like All the Year Round Christmas numbers. All the Year Round is, I think, one of those books that came out every year, like a children's annual, and it has stories in it. But it was something that came out at Christmas time. All the Year Round Christmas numbers. Oh, do let's. Alice was wriggling so with earnestness that Dicky thumped her to make her calm. "We might do it, just for one day," Oswald said, "but it wouldn't be much, only a drop in the ocean compared with the enormous dryness of all the people in the whole world. Still, every little helps, as the mermaid said when she cried into the sea." I'm not quite sure where that saying comes from. Sorry, I'm just grabbing something to prop up my tablet, just to make it a little easier to read from. That's not going to work. I need to put it in its cover. I'll carry on reading though. "Every little helps, as the mermaid said when she cried into the sea." "I know a piece of poetry about that," Denny said. Denny loves poetry. "Small things are best, care and unrest. To wealth and rank are given, but little things on little wings do something or other, I forget what, but it means the same as Oswald was saying about the mermaid." "What are you going to call it?" asked Noel, coming out of a dream. "Call what?" "The free drinks game." "It's a horrid shame if the free drinks game doesn't have a name. You would be to blame if anyone came and—" "Oh, shut up," remarked Dicky. "You've been making that rot up all the time we've been talking instead of listening properly." Dicky hates poetry. "I don't mind it so very much myself, especially Macaulay's and Kipling's and Noel's. There's a lot more lame and dame and name and game and things, and now I've forgotten it," Noel said in gloom, disappointed that he'd forgotten the other words because he was interrupted. "Never mind," Alice answered. "It'll come back to you in the silent watches of the night. You see if it doesn't. But really, Noel's right, it ought to have a name. Free Drinks Company, Thirsty Travellers' Rest, The Traveller's Joy." These names were suggested, but not cared for extra. Then someone said, "I think it was Oswald." Then someone said, "I think it was Oswald who said it. Why not The House Beautiful?" "It can't be a house. It must be in the road. It'll only be a stall." "The stall Beautiful is simply silly," Oswald said. "The bar Beautiful then," said Dicky, who knows what the Rose and Crown bar is like inside, which of course is hidden from girls. It was back in those days. "Oh, wait a minute," cried the dentist, that's Denny, snapping his fingers like he always does when he's trying to remember things. "I thought of something, only Daisy tickled me and it's gone. I know, let's call it the Benevolent Bar." It was exactly right and told the whole truth in 2 words. Benevolent showed it was free, and bar showed what was free, e.g. things to drink. The Benevolent Bar it was. I don't know if they've thought about the fact that the word bar implies alcohol to adults, not to children. I hope they're not going to have some seriously annoyed tramps and travellers. "We went home at once to prepare for the morrow. For of course we meant to do it the very next day. Procrastination is you know what, and delays are dangerous. If we had waited long we might have happened to spend our money on something else. The utmost secrecy had to be observed because Mrs. Pettigrew hates tramps. Most people do who keep fowls, that's chickens and hens and other birds like ducks and geese and everything. Keeping fowls. Albert's uncle was in London till the next evening, so we could not consult him, but we know he's always chock full of intelligent sympathy with the poor and the needy. Acting with the deepest disguise, we made an awning to cover the benevolent barkeepers from the searching rays of the monarch of the skies, that's the sun. We found some old striped sunblinds in the attic and the girls sewed them together. They were not very big when they were done, so we added the girls' striped petticoats. I'm sorry their petticoats turn up so constantly in my narrative, but they really are very useful, especially when the band is cut off. The band is the bit that holds it gathered up. The girls borrowed Mrs. Pettigrew's sewing machine. They could not ask her leave without explanations, which we did not wish to give just then, and she had lent it to them before. They took it to the cellar to work it. so that she should not hear the noise and ask bothering questions. So they've borrowed it without permission. Oopsie. They had to balance it on one end of the beer stand. It was not easy. While they were doing the sewing, we boys went out and got willow poles and chopped the twigs off and got ready as well as we could to put up the awning. When we returned, a detachment of us went down to the shop in the village for Eiffel Tower lemonade. We bought 7 and 6pence worth. Then we made a great label to say what the bar was for. Then there was nothing else to do except to make rosettes out of a blue sash of daisies to show we belonged to the benevolent bar. The next day was as hot as ever. We rose early from our innocent slumbers and went out to the Dover Road, to the spot we'd marked down the day before. It was at a crossroads so as to be able to give drinks to as many people as possible. We hid the awning and poles behind the hedge and went home to brekker. That's breakfast. After break, we got the big zinc bath they wash clothes in, and after filling it with clean water, we just had to empty it again because it was too heavy to lift. So we carried it vacant to the trysting spot and left H.O. and Noel to guard it while we went and fetched separate pails of water. Very heavy work, and no one who wasn't really benevolent would have bothered about it. For an instant, Oswald alone carried 3 pails, which just goes to prove that it's Oswald alone who's actually writing the story. So did Dickie and the dentist. Then we rolled down some empty barrels and stood up 3 of them by the roadside and put planks on them. This made a very first-class table, and we covered it with the best tablecloth we could find in the linen cupboard. We brought out several glasses and some teacups, not the best ones. Oswald was firm about that. And the kettle, and the spirit lamp, and the teapot, in case any weary tramp women fancied a cup of tea instead of Eiffel Tower. H.O. and Noel had to go down to the shop for tea. They need not have grumbled. They had not carried any of the water, and their having to go the second time was only because we forgot to tell them to get some real lemons to put on the bar to show what the drink would be like when you got it. The man at the shop kindly gave us tick for the lemons. That means gave it to them on the basis that they are going to pay for it later. And we cashed up out of our next week, gave it to us on tick for the lemons, and we cashed up out of our next week's pocket money. So they're going to pay him in the future for them. 2 or 3 people passed while we were getting things ready, but no one said anything except the man who said, "Bloomin' Sunday school treat," as if it was too early in the day for anyone to be thirsty. We did not stop the wayfarers. As it was too early in the day for anyone to be thirsty, we did not stop the wayfarers to tell them that their thirst could be slaked without cost at our benevolent bar. But when everything was quite ready and our blue rosettes fastened on our breasts over our benevolent hearts, we stuck up the great placard we had made with benevolent bar, free drinks to all weary travellers, in white wadding on red calico, like Christmas decorations in church. So they'd used stuffing out of something and stuck it on somehow. I'm not sure if it was glue or stitched onto some red calico. Calico is used as a base fabric for a bunch of things, like lining on curtains these days. So it's not fancy stuff. We had meant to fasten this to the edge of the awning, but we had to pin it to the front of the tablecloth because I am sorry to say the awning went wrong from the first. We could not drive the willow poles into the road. It was much too hard, and in the ditch it was too soft, besides being no use. So we had just to cover our benevolent heads with our hats and take it in turns to go into the shadow of the tree on the other side of the road. For we had pitched our table on the sunny side of the way, of course, relying on our broken reed-like awning and wishing to give it a fair chance. Everything looked very nice, and we longed to see somebody really miserable come along so as to be able to relieve their distress. A man and a woman were the first. They stopped and stared, but when Alice said, free drinks, aren't you thirsty?" they said, "No, thank you," and went on. Then came a person from the village. He didn't even say thank you when we asked him, and Oswald began to fear it might be like the awful time when we wandered about on Christmas Day trying to find poor persons and persuade them to eat our conscience pudding. That's probably a bit like the usual sort of when kids are making bun pies in the backyard. Not so sure if that would have been a good idea. But a man in a blue jersey and a red bundle eased Oswald's fears by being willing to drink a glass of lemonade and even to say thank you, I'm sure, quite nicely. After that it was better. As we had foreseen, there were plenty of thirsty people walking along the Dover Road, and even some from the crossroad. We had had the pleasure of seeing 19 tumblers drained to the dregs ere we tasted any ourselves. Nobody asked for tea. More people went by than we gave lemonade to. Some wouldn't have it because they were too grand. One man told us he could pay for his own liquor when he was dry, which, praise be, he wasn't, over and above at present. And others asked if we hadn't any beer, and when we said no, they said it showed what sort we were, as if the sort was not a good one, which it is. And another man said, slops again. You never get nothing for nothing, not this side of heaven, you don't. Look at that bloomin' blue ribbon on 'em. Oh, law, and went on quite sadly without having a drink. Our pigman, who helped us on the Tower of Mystery Day, went by and we hailed him and explained it all to him and gave him a drink and asked him to call as he came back. He liked it all and said we were a real good sort. How different from the man who wanted the beer. Then he went on. One thing I didn't like was that the way boys began to gather. Of course, we could not refuse to give drinks to any traveller who was old enough to ask for it, but when one boy had had 3 glasses of lemonade and asked for another, Oswald said, I think you've jolly well had enough. You can't be really thirsty after all that lot. The boy said, oh, can't I? You'll just see if I can't, and went away. Presently he came back with 4 other boys, all bigger than Oswald, and they all asked for lemonade. Oswald gave it to the 4 new ones, but he was determined in his behaviour to the other one, and wouldn't give him a drop. Then the 5 of them went and sat on a gate a little way off and kept laughing in a nasty way, and whenever a boy went by they called out, I say, here's a go, and as often as not the new boy would hang about with them. It was disquieting, for though they had nearly all had lemonade, we could see it had not made them friendly. A great glorious glow of goodness gladdened those go all together and are called alliteration, because the first letter is the same. A great glorious glow of goodness gladdened our hearts when we saw our own tramp coming down the road. The dogs did not growl at him as they had at the boys or the beer man. I did not say before that we had the dogs with us, but of course we had, because we had promised never to go without them. Oswald said, hello, and the tramp said, hello. Then Alice said, you see, we've taken your advice. We're giving free drinks. Doesn't it look all nice? It does that, said the tramp. I don't mind if I do. So we gave him 2 glasses of lemonade succeedingly and thanked him for giving us the idea. He said we were very welcome, and if we'd no objection, he'd sit down a bit and put on a pipe. He did, and after talking a little more, he fell asleep. Drinking anything seemed to end in sleep with him. I always thought it was only beer and things that made people sleepy, but he was not so. When he was asleep, he rolled into the ditch, but it did not wake him. The boys were getting very noisy, and they began to shout things and to make silly noises with their mouths, and when Oswald and Dickie went over to them and told them to just chuck it, they were worse than ever. I think perhaps Oswald and Dickie might have fought and settled them, though there were 11. Yet back to back you can always do it against overwhelming numbers in a book. Only Alice called out, Oswald, here comes some more. Come back. We went. 3 big men were coming down the road, very red and hot, and not amiable looking. They stopped in front of the benevolent bar and slowly read the wadding and red stuff label. Then one of them said he was blessed or something like that, and another said he was too. The third one said, blessed or not, a drink's a drink. Blue ribbon, though, by... a word you ought not to say, although it's in the Bible and the Catechism as well. Let's have a liquor, little missy. The dogs were growling. But Oswald thought it best not to take any notice of what the dogs said, but to give these men each a drink. So he did. They drank, but not as if they cared about it very much, and then they set their glasses down on the table, a liberty nobody else had entered into, and began to try and chaff Oswald. Oswald said in an under voice to H.O., "Just take charge. I want to speak to the girls a sec. Call if you want anything." And then he drew the others away to say he thought there'd been enough of it. And considering the boys and the new 3 men, perhaps we'd better chuck it and go home. We'd been benevolent nearly 4 hours anyway. While this conversation and the objections of the others were going on, H.O. perpetuated an act which nearly wrecked the benevolent bar. Of course, Oswald was not an eye or ear witness of what had happened. But from what H.O. had said in the calmer moments of later life, I think this was about what happened. One of the big disagreeable men said to H.O., "Ain't got such a thing as a drop of spirit, have you?" H.O. said no, we hadn't, only lemonade and tea. "Lemonade and tea? Blank," bad word I told you about, "and blazes," replied the bad character, for such he afterwards proved to be. "What's that then?" He pointed to a bottle labelled Dewar's Whisky, which stood on the table near the spirit kettle. "Oh, is that what you want?" said H.O. kindly. The man is understood to have said he should bloomin' well think so, but H.O. is not sure about the bloomin'. He held out his glass with about half the lemonade in it, and H.O. generously filled up the tumbler out of the bottle labelled Dewar's Whisky. The man took a great drink, and then suddenly he spat out what happened to be left in his mouth just then and began to swear. It was then that Oswald and Dickie rushed upon the scene. The man was shaking his fist in H.O.'s face, and H.O. was still holding on to the bottle we had brought out the methylated spirits in for the lamp, in case anyone was wanting tea, which they hadn't. "If I was Jim," said the second ruffian, for such indeed they were, when he had snatched the bottle from H.O. and smelt it, "I'd chuck the whole show over the hedge, so I would, and you young gutter snipes after it, so I wouldn't." Oswald saw in a moment that in point of strength, if not numbers, he and his party were outmatched, and the unfriendly boys were drawing gladly near. It is no shame to signal for help when in distress. The best ships do it every day. Oswald shouted, "Help, help!" Before the words were out of his brave yet trembling lips, our own tramp leapt like an antelope from the ditch and said, "Now then, what's up?" The biggest of the 3 immediately knocked him down. He lay still. The biggest then said, "Come on, any more of you? Come on!" Oswald was so enraged at this cowardly attack that he actually hit out at the big man, and he really got one in just above the belt. Then he shut his eyes because he felt that now all was indeed up. There was a shout and a scuffle, and Oswald opened his eyes in astonishment at finding himself still whole and unimpaired. Our own tramp had artfully simulated insensibleness to get the men off their guard, then had suddenly got his arms round a leg each of 2 of the men and pulled them to the ground, helped by Dickie, who saw his game and rushed in at the same time, exactly like Oswald would have done if he had not had his eyes shut ready to meet his doom. The unpleasant boys shouted, and the 3rd man tried to help his unrespectable friends, now on their backs, involved in a desperate struggle with our own tramp, who was on top of them, accompanied by Dickie. It all happened in a minute, and it was all mixed up. The dogs were growling and barking. Martha had one of the men by the trouser leg, and Pincher had another. The girls were screaming like mad, and the strange boys shouted and laughed, little beasts. Then suddenly our pig man came round the corner, and 2 friends of his with him. He had gone and fetched them to take care of us if anything unpleasant occurred. It was very thoughtful and just like him. "Fetch the police!" cried the pigman in noble tones, and H.O. started running to do it, but the scoundrels struggled from under Dickie and our tramp, shook off the dogs and some bits of trouser, and fled heavily down the road. Our pigman said, "Get along home," to the disagreeable boys, and shooed them as if they were hens, and they went. H.O. ran back when they began to go up the road, and there we were, all standing breathless in tears on the scene of the late desperate engagement. Oswald gives you his word of honour that his and Dickie's tears were tears of pure rage. There are such things as tears of pure rage. Anyone who knows will tell you so. We picked up our own tramp and bathed the lump on his forehead with lemonade. The water in the zinc bath had been upset in the struggle. Then he and the pigman and his kind friends helped us carry our things home. The pigman advised us on the way not to try these kind actions without getting a grown-up to help us. He advised us on our way not to try. We've been advised this before, but now I really think we shall never try to be benevolent to the poor and needy again, at any rate not unless we know them very well first. We have seen our own tramp often since. The pigman gave him a job. He has got work to do at last. The pigman says he's not such a very bad chap, only he will fall asleep after the least drop of drink. We know that is his failing. We saw it at once, but it was lucky for us he fell asleep that day near our benevolent bar. I will not go into what my father said about it at all. It was a good deal in it about minding your own business. There generally is in most of the talkings too we get. But he gave our tramp a sovereign, and the pigman says he went to sleep on it for a solid week. So it sounds like the pigman went down to the pub and got plenty to drink. And that's the end of that chapter. So what have you been up to? Hey, have you been doing anything interesting recently? I have been helping son of Jev, who some of you know, with making a cloak out of a blanket, a woolen blanket. It's rather warm, but it sits really well on him. And what we're going to do is we're going to do some more sewing on it to get it to sit neatly without having to fluff around with it. And then he's going to dye it. So it's an old-fashioned woolen blanket, so it's currently a sort of a creamy white colour. And he's going to dye it so it's a nice deep mossy green if we've got enough dye for that. He's got the dye, we just need to actually do the work. So that's been keeping me busy this morning, and then this afternoon and tomorrow I'm going to be taking more photographs of the different wooden urns that my husband makes. You can't see it when I hold my hand here. They're like this. They're sort of like a vase shape with a lid that screws into the top, and they're made out of wood, and he makes those for people. So I'm going to be taking photos of them so I can put them on the website. That's been keeping me busy. And I still have to sort out the stuff in my office behind me, so it's not the photo that you can see. So, yes. At the moment, there's a green screen there. That's why it looks black. And that's why I put that picture there. And behind the green screen, it's just a piece of green material on an old wardrobe frame. You know, those hanging rack frames. Sorry, itchy nose. No, it's not the cat this time. And behind it is boxes and books and cushions and blankets and shoes and bits of rope, all sorts of things, because the back of the space has become the storage space for the house, and it hasn't been sorted, so I need to sort it out. So it's between chapters. I'm meant to be having a drink of water. Don't forget to have yours. That's a bit better. Right. Now, have you had your drink of water, and have you rushed off to the loo for a pee and then come back? The next chapter's quite long, so you need to be ready to sit and listen, unless you want to not listen anymore. That's okay. You can go off and do something else. I don't mind. I'm going to be here reading anyway. Right. Am I ready? I think I am. I'll carry on. Right. I am reading from the Wouldbegoods, being The Further Adventures of the Treasure Seekers, written by Edith Nesbit, and I am reading chapter 12, The Canterbury Pilgrims. I'm guessing this means they're going to pretend again. Pretend to be something else, doing something else. We'll see. Chapter 12, corner of my mouth feels funny. The Canterbury Pilgrims. The author of these few lines really does hope to goodness that no one will be such an owl as to think from the number of things we did when we were in the country that we were wretched, neglected little children whose grown-up relations sparkled in the bright haunts of pleasure and whirled in the giddy what's-its-name of fashion, while we were left to weep forsaken at home. It's nothing of the kind, and I wish you to know that my father was with us a good deal. And Albert's uncle, who is really no uncle of ours, but only of Albert next door when we lived in Lewisham, gave up a good many of his valuable hours to us, and the father of Denny and Daisy came now and then, and other people, quite as many as we wished to see, and we had some very decent times with them, and enjoyed ourselves very much indeed, thank you. In some ways, the good times you have with grown-ups are better than the ones you have by yourselves. At any rate, they are safer. It's almost impossible, then, to do anything fatal without being pulled up short by a grown-up, ere yet the deed is done. And if you are careful, anything that goes wrong can be looked on as the grown-up's fault when they're with you. But these secure pleasures are not so interesting to tell about as the things you do when there is no one to stop you on the edge of a rash act. It is curious, too, that many of our most interesting games happened when grown-ups were far away. For instance, when we were pilgrims. It was just after the business of the benevolent bar, and it was a wet day. It is not easy to amuse yourself indoors on a wet day, as older people seem to think, especially when you are far removed from your own home and haven't got all your own books and things. The girls were playing Halma, which is a beastly game. That's something you can look up. Write that down so you can find out what they're talking about. Noel was writing poetry. H.O. was singing I Don't Know What to Do to the tune of Canaan's Happy Shore. It goes like this and is very tiresome to listen to. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. It is a beastly rainy day and I don't know what to do. Yes, it would get boring. And that name of that game is Halma, Halma, if you want to look it up. The rest of us were trying to make him shut up. We put a carpet bag over his head, but he went on inside it. Then we sat on him, but he sang under us. We held him upside down and made him crawl head first under the sofa, but when even there he kept it up, we saw that nothing short of violence would induce him to silence, so we let him go. Then he said we had hurt him, and we said we were only in fun, and he said if we were, he wasn't. And ill-feeling might have grown up even out of a playful brotherly act like ours had been, only Alice chucked the Halma and said, let dogs delight. Come on, let's play something. Then Dora said, yes, but look here, now we're together, I do want to say something. What about the Wouldbegoods Society? Many of us groaned, and one said, here, here. I will not say which one, but it was not Oswald. No, but really, Dora said, I don't want to be preachy, but you know we did say we'd try to be good, and it says in a book I was reading only yesterday that not being naughty is not enough. You must be good, and we've hardly done anything. The Golden Deed book's almost empty. Couldn't we have a book of leaden deeds? Said Noel, coming out of his poetry. Then there'd be plenty for Alice to write about if she wants to, or brass, or zinc, or aluminium deeds. We shan't even ever fill a book with golden ones. H.O. had rolled himself in the red tablecloth and said Noel was only advising us to be naughty, and again peace waved in the balance. But Alice said, oh, H.O., don't. He didn't mean that, but really and truly I wish wrong things weren't so interesting. You begin to do a noble act, and then it gets so exciting, and before you know where you are doing something wrong as hard as you can lick. And enjoying it too, Dick said. It's very curious, Denny said, but you don't seem to be able to be certain inside yourself whether what you're doing is right, if you happen to like doing it. But if you don't like doing it, you know quite well. I only thought of that just now. I wish Noel would make a poem about it. I am, Noel said. It began about a crocodile, but it's finishing itself up quite different from what I meant it to at first. Just wait a minute. He wrote very hard while his kind brothers and sisters and his little friends waited the minute he had said. And then he read, the crocodile is very wise. He lives in the Nile with little eyes. He eats the hippopotamus too, and if he could, he would eat up you. The lovely woods and starry skies he looks upon with glad surprise and sees the riches of the East and the tiger and lion, kings of beast. So let all be good and beware of saying shan't and won't and don't care, for doing wrong is easier far than any of the right things I know about are. and I couldn't make it king of beasts because of it not rhyming with east, so I put the S of beasts onto king. It comes even in the end. We all said it was a very nice piece of poetry. Noel gets really ill if you don't like what he writes. And then he said, if it's trying that's wanted, I don't care how hard we try to be good, but we may as well do something nice, do it some nice way. Let's be Pilgrim's Progress like I wanted to at first. And we were all beginning to say we didn't want to when suddenly Dora had an idea. Oh, look here, I know. We'll be the Canterbury pilgrims. People used to go pilgrimages to make themselves good. With peas in their shoes, the dentist said. It's in a piece of poetry, only the man boiled his peas, which is quite unfair. They're meant to, the peas they were talking about in history were meant to be dried peas, so they hurt your feet to remind you of why you were meant to be doing whatever it was you were on pilgrimage for. And cooked peas would just go mushy, so they'd just feel mushy in the bottom of your shoes and they wouldn't hurt. So that's why it was considered unfair. Oh, yes, said H.O., and cocked hats. No, not cocked, cockled. It was Alice who said that. And they had staves and scrips, and they told each other tales. We might as well. Cockled means a hat with a cockle shell, because the pilgrimage symbol used to be a cockle shell or a scallop shell, those who went on pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, which was a common pilgrimage for people to do, where they would walk the whole way, and it's hundreds and hundreds of miles. They would wear on their hat or on their cloak a shell, a cockle shell or a scallop shell, what we would call a scallop shell. They had staffs and scrips, and they told each other tales. We might as well. Oswald and Dora had been reading about the Canterbury pilgrims in a book called A Short History of the English People. It is not at all short, really, 3 fat volumes, but it has jolly good pictures. It was written by a gentleman named Green, so Oswald said, all right, I'll be the knight. I'll be the wife of Bath, Dora said. What will you be, Dickie? I don't care. I'll be Mr. Bath if you like. We don't know much about the people, Alice said. How many were there? 30, Oswald replied, but we needn't be all of them. There's a nun priest. Is that a man or a woman? Oswald said he could not be sure by the picture, but Alice and Noel could be it between them, so that was settled. Then we got the book and looked at the dresses to see if we could make up dresses for the parts, costumes. At first we thought we would, because it would be something to do, and it was a very wet day, but they looked difficult, especially the millers. Denny wanted to be the miller, but in the end he was the doctor, because it was next door to dentist, which is what we call him for short. Daisy was to be the prioress, because she is good and has a soft little red mouth. I have no idea what that's reference to. And H.O. would be the manciple. I don't know what that is, because the picture of him is bigger than most of the others, and he said manciple was a nice portmanteau word, half Mandarin and half disciple. I'm not sure if that's true. Let's get the easiest parts of the dresses ready first, Alice said, the pilgrims' staffs and hats and the cockles. So Oswald and Dickie braved the fury of the elements and went into the wood beyond the orchard to cut ash sticks. We got 8 jolly good long ones. Then we took them home, and the girls bothered till we changed our clothes, which were indeed sopping with the elements we had faced, because it's raining, remember. Then we peeled the sticks. They were nice and white at first, but they soon got dirty when we carried them. It's a curious thing. However often you wash your hands, they always seem to come off on anything white. And we nailed paper rosettes on the top of them. That was the nearest we could get to the cockle shells. And we may as well have them there as on our hats, Alice said. And let's each call each other by our right names today, just to get into it. Don't you think so, Knight? Yes, nun priest, Oswald was replying, but Noel said she was only half the nun priest, and again a threat of unpleasantness darkened the air. But Alice said, don't be a piggy-wiggy, Noel dear. You can have it all. I don't want it. I'll just be a plain pilgrim, or Henry who killed Becket. So she was called the plain pilgrim, and she did not mind. We thought of cocked hats, but they are warm to wear, and the big garden hats that make you look like pictures on the covers of plantation songs did beautifully. We put cockle shells on them. Sandals we did try with pieces of oilcloth cut the shape of soles and fastened with tape, but the dust gets into your toes so, and we decided boots were better for such a long walk. Some of the pilgrims who were very earnest decided to tie their boots with white tape crossed outside to pretend sandals. Denny was one of these earnest palmers. As for dresses, there was no time to make them properly, and at first we thought of nightgowns, but we decided not to, in case the people in Canterbury were not used to that sort of pilgrim nowadays. We made up our minds to go as we were, or as we might happen to be the next day. You will be ready to believe we hoped next day would be fine. It was. Fair was the morn when the pilgrims arose and went down to breakfast. Albert's uncle had had brekker early and was hard at work in his study. We heard his quill pen squeaking when we listened at the door. It is not wrong to listen at doors when there is only one person inside, because nobody would tell itself secrets out loud when it was alone. We got lunch from the housekeeper, Mrs. Pettigrew. She seems almost to like us all to go out and take our lunch with us, though I should think it must be very dull for her all alone. Quite possibly that's why she likes them to go out, I have to say. I remember, though, that Eliza, our late general maid, and lady who does all the things around the house, was just the same. I think they just find the children a bit overwhelming at times, these various people. We took the dear dogs, of course. Since the Tower of Mystery happened, we are not allowed to go anywhere without the escort of these faithful friends of man. We did not take Martha because bulldogs do not like walks. Remember this if you ever have one of those valuable animals. She's an English bulldog, and they're quite sturdy, stocky, fairly short legs, not fond of long walks. When we were all ready with our big hats and cockle shells and our staves and our tape sandals, the pilgrims looked very nice. Only we haven't any scrips. Dora said, "What is a scrip?" "I think it's something to read, a roll of parchment or something." They're thinking that it's a scrip because it's from the word script, which is like a text that's written on a page. A scrip, I happen to know, is actually a bag for carrying your things, a bit like a satchel or a pouch that you wear around your waist, that sort of thing. That's actually what a scrip is, but that's obviously not something that they're familiar with. "I think it's something to read, a roll of parchment or something." So we had old newspapers rolled up and carried them in our hands. We took the Globe and the Westminster Gazette because they are pink and green, the newspapers. The dentist wore his white sand shoes sandaled with black tape and bare legs. They really looked almost as good as bare feet. "We ought to have peas in our shoes," he said, but we did not think so. We knew what a very little stone in your boot will do, let alone peas. Of course, we knew the way to go to Canterbury because the old Pilgrims Road runs just above our house. So they're in the Downs in England. The Canterbury pilgrimage route is from Winchester Cathedral in the west, near the south coast, and up and along the North Downs, and then down to Canterbury in Kent. And it's quite a long way. So they are in Kent, so they're somewhere near the old Pilgrims route. The old Pilgrims Road runs just above our house. It is a very pretty road, narrow and often shady. It's nice for walking, but carts do not like it because it's rough and rutty, so there is grass growing in patches on it. I have said it was a fine day, which means that it was not raining, but the sun did not shine all the time. "'Tis well o' night," said Alice, "that the orb of day shines not in under splendour. Thou sayest sooth, plain pilgrim," replied Oswald. "'Tis jolly warm even as it is. I wish I wasn't two people, Noel said. It seems to make me hotter. I think I'll be a reeve or something. But we would not let him, and we explained that if he hadn't been so beastly particular, Alice would have been half of him, and he only had himself to thank, if being all of a nun priest made him hot. But it was warm, certainly, and it was some time since we'd gone so far in boots. Yet when H.O. complained, we did our duty as pilgrims and made him shut up. He did, as soon as Alice said that about whinging and grizzling being below the dignity of a manciple. It was so warm that the prioress and the wife of Bath gave up walking with their arms round each other in their usual silly way. Albert's uncle calls it Laura Matilda-ing, whatever that means. And the doctor and Mr. Bath had to take their jackets off and carry them. I'm sure if an artist or a photographer or any person who liked pilgrims had seen us, he would have been very pleased. The paper cockle shells were first rate, but it was awkward having them on the top of the staffs because they got in your way when you wanted the staff to use as a walking stick. We stepped out like a man, all of us, and kept it up as well as we could in book talk, and at first all was merry as a dinner bell, but presently Oswald, who was the very perfect gentle knight, could not help noticing that one of us was growing very silent and rather pale, like people are when they have eaten something that disagrees with them before they are quite sure of the fell truth. So he said, "What's up, dentist, old man?" quite kindly, and like a perfect knight, though, of course, he was annoyed with Denny. It is sickening when people turn pale in the middle of a game and everything is spoiled and you have to go home and tell the spoiler how sorry you are that he's knocked up and pretend not to mind about the game being spoiled. Denny said, "Nothing," but Oswald knew better. Then Alice said, "Let's rest a bit, Oswald. It is hot." "Sir Oswald, if you please, plain pilgrim," returned her brother dignifiedly. "Remember, I'm a knight." So then we sat down and had lunch. And Denny looked better. We played adverbs and 20 questions and apprenticing your son for a bit in the shade. Apprenticing your son I've not heard of, or adverbs is a game. Then Dicky said it was time to set sail if we meant to make the port of Canterbury that night. Of course, pilgrims reckon not of ports, but Dicky never does play the game thoughtfully. We went on. I believe we should have got to Canterbury all right and quite early, only Denny got paler and paler, and presently Oswald saw beyond any doubt that he was beginning to walk lame. "Shoes hurt you, dentist?" he said, still with such kind, striving cheerfulness. "Not much. It's all right," returned the other. So on we went, but we were all a bit tired now, and the sun was hotter and hotter. The clouds had gone away. We had begun to sing to keep up our spirits. We sang the British Grenadiers and John Brown's Body, which is grand to march to, and a lot of others. We were just starting on Tramp, 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 the boys are marching, when Denny stopped short. He stood first on one foot and then on the other, and suddenly screwed up his face and put his knuckles in his eyes and sat down on a heap of stones by the roadside. When we pulled his hands down, he was actually crying. The author does not wish to say it is babyish to cry. "Whatever's up?" we all asked, and Daisy and Dora petted him to get him to say, but he only went on howling and said it was nothing, only we would go on and leave him, and call for him as we came back. Oswald thought very likely something had given Denny the stomachache, and he did not like to say so before all of us, so he sent the others away and told them to walk on a bit. Then he said, "Now, Denny, don't be a young ass. What is it? Is it stomachache?" And Denny stopped crying to say "No" as loud as he could. "Well then," Oswald said, "look here. You're spoiling the whole thing. Don't be a jackape. Denny, what is it? You won't tell the others if I tell you?" "Not if you say not to," Oswald answered in kindly tones. "Well, it's my shoes." "Take them off, man." "You won't laugh?" "No," said Oswald, so impatiently that the others looked back to see why he was shouting. He waved them away and with humble gentleness began to undo the black tape sandals. Denny let him, crying hard all the time. When Oswald had got off the first shoe, the mystery was made plain to him. "Well, of all the—" he said in proper indignation. Denny quailed, though he said he did not. But then he doesn't know what quailing is, and if Denny did not quail, then Oswald does not know what quailing is either. For when Oswald took the shoe off, he naturally chucked it down and gave it a kick, and a lot of little pinky yellow things rolled out, and Oswald looked closer at the interesting sight, and the little things were split peas. "Perhaps you'll tell me," said the gentle knight with the politeness of despair, "why on earth you've played the goat like this." "Oh, don't be angry," Denny said, and now his shoes were off. He curled and uncurled his toes and stopped crying. "I knew pilgrims put peas in their shoes, and oh, I wish you wouldn't laugh." "I'm not," said Oswald, still with bitter politeness. "I didn't want to tell you I was going to, because I wanted to be better than all of you, and I thought if you knew I was going to, you'd want to too, and you wouldn't when I said it first. So I just put some peas in my pocket and dropped one or two at a time into my shoes when you weren't looking." In his secret heart, Oswald said, "Greedy young ass," for it is greedy to want to have more of anything than other people, even goodness. Outwardly, Oswald said nothing. "You see," Denny went on, "I do want to be good, and if pilgriming is to do you good, you ought to do it properly. I shouldn't mind being hurt in my feet if it would make me good forever and ever. And besides, I wanted to play the game thoroughly. You always say I don't." The breast of the kind Oswald was touched by these last words. "I think you're quite good enough," he said. "I'll fetch back the others." "No, they won't," laugh. And we all went back to Denny, and the girls made a fuss with him, but Oswald and Dicky were grave and stood aloof. They were old enough to see that being good was all very well, but after all, you had to get the boy home somehow. When they said this, as agreeably as they could, Denny said, "It's all right, someone will give me a lift." "You think everything in the world can be put right with a lift," Dicky said, and he did not speak lovingly. "So it can," said Denny, "when it's your feet. I shall easily get a lift home." "Not here you won't," said Alice. "No one goes down this road, but the high road's just round the corner where you see the telegraph wires." Dicky and Oswald made a sedan chair and carried Denny to the high road, and we sat down in a ditch to wait. A sedan chair is an arm hold, where you hold on to each other's arms and the person that you're carrying between you. Used to be something that we had to learn as part of our first aid training. And we sat down in a ditch to wait. For a long time nothing went by but a brewer's dray. We hailed it, of course, but the man was so sound asleep that our hails were vain, and none of us thought soon enough about springing like a flash to the horses' heads, though we all thought of it directly the dray was out of sight. One thing about using horse-drawn vehicles in those days was if they knew where they were going, you could basically leave them to it, which people did. Not so good in town. So we had to keep on sitting there by the dusty road, and more than one pilgrim was heard to say it wished we had never come. Oswald was not one of those who uttered this useless wish. At last, just when despair was beginning to eat into the vital parts of even Oswald, there was a quick tap-tapping of horses' feet on the road, and a dog-cart came in sight with a lady in it, all alone. We hailed her like the desperate shipwrecked mariners in the longboat hail the passing sail. She pulled up. She was not a very old lady. 25, we found out afterwards her age was, and she looked jolly. "Well," she said, "what's the matter?" "It's this poor little boy," Dora said, pointing to the dentist, who'd gone to sleep in the dry ditch, with his mouth open as usual. "His feet hurt him so, and will you give him a lift?" "But why are you all rigged out like this?" asked the lady, looking at our cockle shells and sandals and things. We told her. "And how has he hurt his feet?" she asked, and we told her that. She looked very kind. "Poor little chap," she said. "Where do you want to go?" We told her that too. We had no concealments from this lady. "Well," she said, "I have to go on to, what's its name?" "Canterbury," said H.O. "Well, yes, Canterbury," she said. "It's only about half a mile. I'll take the poor little pilgrim and, yes, the 3 girls. You boys must walk. You boys must walk. Then we'll have tea and see the sights, and I'll drive you home. At least some of you. How will that do?" We thanked her very much indeed, and said it would do very nicely. Then we helped Denny into the cart, and the girls got up, and the red wheels of the cart spun away through the dust. I wish it had been an omnibus the lady was driving, said H.O. Then we could all have had a ride. Don't you be so discontented, Dickie said, and Noel said, you ought to be jolly thankful you haven't got to carry Denny all the way home on your back. You'd have had to do it if you'd been out here alone with him. When we got to Canterbury, it was much smaller than we expected, and the cathedral not much bigger than the church that is next to the moat house. There seemed to be only one big street, but we supposed the rest of the city was hidden away somewhere. There was a large inn with a green before it, and the red-wheeled dog cart was standing in the stable yard, and the lady with Denny and the others sitting on the benches in the porch looking out for us. The inn was called the George and Dragon, and it made me think of the days when there were coaches and highwaymen and footpads and jolly landlords and adventures at country inns like you read about. I'm thinking that this is probably one of the little centres on the edge of Canterbury, not the main centre. Just because, yeah, I don't think she would have gone all the way in, because Canterbury now is quite big. Not as big when these people were around, but still bigger than the children are seeing. Sorry, itchy. We've ordered tea, said the lady. Would you like to wash your hands? We saw that she wished us to, so we said yes, we would. Girls and Denny were already much cleaner than when we had parted from them. Funny that. Sorry, I had been at the end of one page and now it's another page and I'd lost where it was. There was a courtyard to the inn and a wooden staircase outside the house. We were taken up to this and washed our hands in a big room with a 4-post wooden bed and dark red hangings, just the sort of hangings that would not show the stains of gore in dear old adventurous times. Then we had tea in a great big room with wooden chairs and tables, very polished and old. It was a very nice tea with lettuces and cold meat and 3 kinds of jam, as well as cake and new bread, which we are not allowed at home. While tea was being had, the lady talked to us. She was very kind. There are 2 sorts of people in the world besides others. One sort understand what you're driving at, and the other don't. This lady was the one sort. After everyone had as much to eat as they could possibly want, the lady said, "What was it you particularly wanted to see at Canterbury?" "The cathedral," Alice said, "and the palace where Thomas à Becket was murdered." "And the Danejon," said Dickie. Oswald wanted to see the walls because he likes the story of St. Alphege and the Danes. "Well, well," said the lady, and she put on her hat. It was a really sensible one, not a blob of fluffy stuff and feathers put on sideways and stuck on with long pins and no shade to your face, but almost as big as ours, with a big brim and red flowers and black strings to tie under your chin to keep it from blowing off. Then we went out together to see Canterbury. Dickie and Oswald took it in turns to carry Denny on their backs. The lady called him the wounded comrade. We went first to the church. Oswald, whose quick brain was easily aroused to suspicions, was afraid the lady might begin talking in the church, but she did not. The church door was open. I remembered Mother telling us once it was right and good for churches to be left open all day so that tired people could go in and be quiet and say their prayers if they wanted to, but it does not seem respectful to talk out loud in church. See note A. I'm not sure where note A is. We will find out. When we got outside, the lady said, "You can imagine how on the chancel steps began the mad struggle in which Becket, after hurling one of his assailants, armour and all, to the ground." "It would have been much cleverer," H.O. interrupted, "to hurl him without his armour and leave that standing up." "Go on," said Alice and Oswald, when they had given H.O. a withering glance, and the lady did go on. She told us all about Becket, and then about St. Alphege, who had bones thrown at him till he died because he wouldn't tax his poor people to please the beastly rotten Danes. And Denny recited a piece of poetry he knows called the Ballad of Canterbury. It begins about Danish warships, snake-shaped, and ends about doing as you're done by. It is long, but it has all the beef bones in it, and all about St. Alphege. Then the lady showed us the Danejon, and it was like an oast house. Kent is known for oast houses, and Canterbury walls that Alphege defied the Danes from looked down on a quite common farmyard. The hospital was like a barn, and other things were like other things, but we went all about and enjoyed it very much. The lady was quite amusing, besides sometimes talking like a real cathedral guide I met afterwards. See note B. When at last we said we were through, we thought Canterbury was very small considering. The lady said, well, it seemed a pity to come so far and not at least hear something about Canterbury. And then at once we knew the worst, and Alice said, what a horrid sell! But Oswald, with immediate courteousness, said, I don't care, you did it awfully well. And he did not say, though he owns he thought of it, I knew it all the time, though it was a great temptation, because really it was more than half true. He had felt from the first that this was too small for Canterbury. See note C. The real name of the place was Hazelbridge, and not Canterbury at all. That's another place you can look up. We went to Canterbury another time. See note D. We were not angry with the lady for selling us about it being Canterbury, because she had really kept it up first rate, and she asked us if we minded very handsomely, and we said we liked it, but now we did not care how soon we got home. The lady saw this and said, come, our chariots are ready and our horses caparisoned. That is a first-rate word out of a book. It cheered Oswald up, and he liked her for using it, though he wondered why she had said chariots. When we got back to the inn, I saw her dog cart was there, and a grocer's cart too, with B. Munn, grocer, Hazelbridge on it. That's the sign writing. She took the girls in her cart, and the boys went with the grocer. His horse was a very good one to go, but only you had to hit it with the wrong end of the whip. But the cart was very bumpety. The evening dews were falling, at least I suppose so, but you do not feel dew in a grocer's cart. When we reached home, we all thanked the lady very much and said we hoped we should see her again some day. She said she hoped so. The grocer drove off, and when we had all shaken hands with the lady and kissed her, according as we were boys or girls, or little boys, she touched up her horse and drove away. That means she used her whip just ever so slightly, just to remind the horse it's time to go. She turned at the corner to wave to us, and just as we had done waving and were turning into the house, Albert's uncle came into our midst like a whirling wind. He was in flannels, and his shirt had no stud at the neck, and his hair was all rumpled, and his hands were inky, and we knew he had left off in the middle of a chapter by the wildness in his eye. Who was that lady? He said. Where did you meet her? Mindful as ever of what he was told, Oswald began to tell the story from the beginning. The other day, protector of the poor, he began, Dora and I were reading about the Canterbury pilgrims. Oswald thought Albert's uncle would be pleased to find his instructions about beginning at the beginning had borne fruit, but instead he interrupted, Stow it, you young duffer, where did you meet her? Oswald answered briefly in wounded accents, Hazelbridge. Then Albert's uncle rushed upstairs 3 at a time, and as he went he called out to Oswald, Get out my bike, old man, and blow up the back tyre. I am sure Oswald was as quick as anyone could have been, but long ere the tyre was thoroughly blowed, Albert's uncle appeared, with a collar stud and tie and blazer, and his hair tidy, and wrenching the unoffending machine from Oswald's surprised fingers. Albert's uncle finished pumping up the tyre and then flinging himself into the saddle, he set off, scorching down the road at a pace not surpassed by any highwayman, however black and high-mettled his steed. We were left looking at each other. He must have recognised her, Dickie said. Perhaps, Noel said. She is the old nurse who alone knows the dark secret of his high-born birth. Not old enough, by chalks, Oswald said. I shouldn't wonder, said Alice, if she holds the secret of the will that will make him rolling in long-lost wealth. I wonder if he'll catch her, Noel said. I'm quite certain all of his future depends on it. Perhaps she's his long-lost sister, and the estate was left to them equally, only she couldn't be found, so it couldn't be shared up. Perhaps he's only in love with her, Dora said, parted by cruel fate at an early age. He has ranged the wide world ever since, trying to find her. I hope to goodness he hasn't. Anyway, he's not ranged since we knew him. Never further than Hastings, Oswald said. We don't want any of that rot. What rot? Daisy asked, and Oswald said, getting married and all that sort of rubbish. And Daisy and Dora were the only ones that didn't agree with him. Even Alice owned that being bridesmaids must be fairly good fun. It's no good. You may treat girls as well as you like and give them every comfort and luxury and play fair just as if they were boys, but there is something unmanly about the best of girls. They go silly, like milk goes sour, without any warning. When Albert's uncle returned, he was very hot, with a beaded brow, but pale as the dentist when the peas were at their worst. Did you catch her? H.O. asked. Albert's uncle's brow looked black as the cloud that thunder will presently break from. No, he said. Is she your long-lost nurse? H.O. went on before we could stop him. Long-lost grandmother? I knew the lady long ago in India, said Albert's uncle as he left the room, slamming the door in a way we should be forbidden to. He said long-lost grandmother. And that was the end of the Canterbury pilgrimage. As for the lady, we did not then know whether she was his long-lost grandmother that he had known in India or not, though we thought she seemed youngish for the part. We found out afterwards whether she was or not, but that comes in another part. His manner was not the one that makes you go on asking questions. The Canterbury pilgriming did not exactly make us good, but then, as Dora said, we had not done anything wrong that day, so we were 24 hours to the good. And then here's the footnotes. Note A. Afterwards we went and saw real Canterbury. It is very large. A disagreeable man showed us round the cathedral and jawed all the time quite loud as if it wasn't a church. I remember one thing he said, it was this. This is the Dean's Chapel. It was the Lady Chapel in the wicked days when people used to worship the Virgin Mary. And H.O. said, I suppose they worship the Dean now? Dean's Chapel, the Lady Chapel. That makes sense for a young child. Some strange people who were there laughed out loud. I think this is worse in church than not taking your cap off when you come in, as H.O. forgot to do, because the cathedral was so big he didn't think it was a church. That's why he forgot. Note B, see note C. Note C, see note D. Note D, see note E. Note E, see note A, which was about going and seeing the real Canterbury and cathedral. This ends the Canterbury Pilgrims. And that's the end of the chapter, and that's the end of my reading for you today. And I shall continue next time with chapter 13, The Dragon's Teeth, or Army Seed. There you go. That sounds intriguing. So I'm off to get some other things done, and I hope you've got a nice afternoon, evening, morning, day, whatever ahead of you. Bye. See you next time.